Welcome to History in the Shadow Script. Please subscribe our channel if you like our videos. Most feared warriors in history, in the blood-soaked fields of history. 5 warriors emerged whose names alone could empty enemy fortresses. The Varangian Guard who drank from their enemies' skulls. The Immortals who never showed their faces. The Berserkers who felt no pain. The Mamluks who were trained from childhood to kill. And the Spartans who were bred for war before they could walk. These weren't soldiers. They were death incarnate. This is the story of warriors so feared. Kingdoms paid tribute just to avoid facing them in battle. Main story: close your eyes and imagine this. It's 480 BC. You're a Persian soldier standing on the plains of Thermopylae. Before you stands a wall of bronze shields. 300 Spartans motionless as statues. Your army numbers 100,000. You should feel confident. Instead, your bladder loosens, because you've heard the stories. And in war, stories kill before swords ever do. Let me take you through history's most terrifying warriors. Men who weren't just skilled fighters, but psychological weapons whose mere presence on the battlefield determined outcomes before a single drop of blood was spilled. The Spartans. Bred for slaughtr. Sparta didn't train warriors. Sparta manufactured them. The process began before birth. Spartan women were fed special diets, exercised rigorously, chosen for genetic strength. When a male child emerged from the womb, he wasn't welcomed with celebration. He was inspected. Elders examined every inch of the infant's body, searching for weakness, deformity, any sign of imperfection. If found wanting, the baby was carried to Mount Taygetus and left to die of exposure. No ceremony, no tears. Just cold, brutal efficiency. Those who passed inspection entered the Agoge at age 7, a training program so savage it makes modern special forces selection look like summer camp. Boys were given one cloak for winter and summer. Deliberately starved to teach them to steal food without being caught. Beaten regularly not as punishment, but as conditioning. They slept on beds of reeds they gathered themselves from riverbanks, using bare hands because tools made you soft. The Cryptia, the final test, required teenage Spartans to survive alone in the wilderness while hunting and killing helot slaves. Not for food, not for defense, for practice. To teach them that human life, when it belonged to an enemy, was worth less than the blade that ended it. A Spartan warrior could march 30 miles in full armor without water. Could fight for hours in bronze that weighed 60 pounds. Could maintain phalanx formation while comrades died inches away. Never breaking, never faltering, because breaking formation meant everyone died. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans held off the entire Persian army for 3 days. They didn't hold a strategic position, they held a 20-foot wide pass through sheer, brutal violence. When the Persians finally overwhelmed them through betrayal, they found Spartan corpses buried under mountains of Persian dead. One Spartan, Aristodemus, survived and returned to Sparta. His punishment? Social death. Better to die in battle than live with shame. The Spartans understood something fundamental. Fear is the most effective weapon. Every enemy who faced them knew they were fighting men who had been trained since childhood to view death as preferable to retreat. The Berserkers. Warriors who felt Thermopylae. Now shift forward to 793 AD. Lindisfarne Monastery, England. Peaceful monks tending their gardens. Then, from the sea fog, longships emerged like demons from pagan nightmares. And from those ships poured something that defied explanation. The Berserkers. These Viking warriors didn't wear armor. They wore bear or wolf skins. They didn't march to battle. They ran, frothing at the mouth, biting their shields, howling like animals. And when they reached enemy lines, they fought with a fury that seemed supernatural. Because it was supernatural. Or so everyone believed. Modern historians debate whether berserkers consumed psychoactive substances, henbane, magic mushrooms, alcohol mixed with hallucinogens. Whether they induced altered states through rhythmic dancing and hyperventilation. Whether they were simply psychologically conditioned through religious rituals to enter trance states. But here's what we know for certain. Berserkers felt no pain in battle. Arrows that would drop normal men didn't slow them. Sword wounds that should have been fatal were ignored until the battle ended. Then suddenly, The berserker would collapse as if his body had waited for permission to acknowledge the damage. They bit through their shields hard enough to splinter wood. They attacked naked in winter campaigns, immune to cold. After battles, they would collapse into deep sleeps lasting days, their bodies finally processing the trauma they'd ignored. The Norse themselves feared berserkers. They were kept separate from regular troops because in their battle rage, they couldn't distinguish friend from enemy. They were pointed at enemy lines and released like rabid dogs. King Harald Fairhair employed them as shock troops. Not soldiers, psychological weapons. Because when your enemy sees men charging who seem impervious to injury, who fight with the fury of wild animals, who laugh while dying, you break. Your formation crumbles. You run. And then you die. The Varangian Guard. Mercenaries of Night Constantinople. 988 AD. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome, surrounded by enemies. Emperor Basil II needed bodyguards he could trust absolutely. Not Byzantine nobles with political ambitions. Not local soldiers with divided loyalties. He needed foreigners. He needed monsters. He recruited Varangians, Norse and later Anglo-Saxon warriors who swore blood oaths to protect the emperor with their lives. The recruitment process was simple. Prove you could kill 20 men in single combat and survive. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were men who had left their homelands because they were too violent, too bloodthirsty, too dangerous to integrate into normal society. Vikings who made other Vikings nervous. Anglo-Saxons who'd fled England after the Norman conquest, bringing with them a hatred of defeat that burned hotter than Greek fire. The Varangians carried Dane axes, 6-foot-long weapons that could split a man from skull to groin in one swing, cut through chain mail like cloth, decapitate horses with casual efficiency. They trained by cutting through suspended pig carcasses in single strokes. But their psychological impact came from their rituals. After particularly significant victories, Varangians would drink from the skulls of enemy commanders. Not metaphorically, literally drink wine or mead from skulls they'd cleaned and lined with silver. They wore jewelry made from the teeth and bones of worthy opponents. They sang songs that detailed, in graphic specificity, every kill they'd made, every wound they'd given, every scream they'd heard. They were granted palace-pillaging rights. When a new emperor took power, the Varangians could enter the treasury and take as much gold as they could carry in both arms. This created warriors who were not just skilled, but fabulously wealthy, which attracted more skilled warriors, creating a positive feedback loop of lethality. For 4 centuries, no assassination attempt on a Byzantine emperor succeeded while Varangians stood guard. Not because assassins didn't try, because Varangians didn't sleep. They rotated in 4-hour shifts, maintaining perfect alertness, and they had standing orders. Anyone who approached the emperor without permission died. Immediately, no questions, no trials. Byzantine sources describe Varangians as men who fight as if drunk on death itself. The Immortals. The faceless Army Persia. 550 BC. Cyrus the Great built an empire spanning 3 continents. His secret weapon? An elite unit of exactly 10,000 warriors called the Immortals. The name came from their most terrifying characteristic. They never diminished. When an immortal fell in battle, within hours, a replacement appeared. Fully armored, fully trained, indistinguishable from the man who died. The unit maintained exactly 10,000 warriors at all times. To enemies, it seemed supernatural, as if death had no power over them. But the reality was more frightening than myth. Immortals were recruited from birth. Persian noble families competed to have their sons selected for the training compounds, fortified estates where boys disappeared for 15 years, emerging as perfect soldiers. They learned not just combat, but tactics, logistics, multiple languages, court etiquette, music, poetry. They were warrior scholars, equally comfortable discussing philosophy or disemboweling enemies. They wore scale armor that covered every inch of their bodies. Metal fish scales laced together to create flexible protection that could turn aside arrows and sword strikes. Their faces were covered by masks shaped like human faces, but smoother, more perfect than any real face. Expressionless, unchanging. In human.in battle, they fought in perfect silence. No war cries, no shouting, Just the whisper of arrows, the ring of steel, the efficient murder of enemies. The silence was worse than screaming. It suggested machines, not men. It suggested that killing you meant nothing to them emotionally, that you were simply a task to be completed. They never broke formation. Never retreated without orders. When surrounded, they formed defensive squares and fought until relief arrived or they died. And because replacements appeared so quickly, it seemed like they never died at all. Persian kings used immortals as both bodyguards and expeditionary forces. When rebellion broke out in a province, the immortals arrived, crushed resistance with mechanical efficiency, and disappeared. The message was clear. Resistance was futile because the empire had soldiers who couldn't be defeated, couldn't be depleted, couldn't be stopped, the Mamluks. Slave warriors who became Kings Egypt, 1250 AD. The Ayyubid Sultanate faced Mongol invasion, the same Mongols who'd conquered everything from Korea to Poland. The same Mongols who'd never been defeated in pitched battle. The same Mongols who were, at that moment, absolutely certain they would add Egypt to their empire. They met the Mamluks at Ain Jalut. It was the Mongols' first major defeat. How did slave warriors defeat the most feared conquerors in history? Mamluks were purchased as boys, usually Turkish or Circassian slaves, aged 8 to 12 and entered training facilities called tabakat. For a decade, they studied nothing but war. Horsemanship so advanced they could shoot arrows backwards while galloping at full speed. Swordsmanship that emphasized economy of motion, every strike with purpose, nothing wasted. Lance techniques that could punch through chainmail at full charge. But the real weapon was psychological conditioning. Mamluks had no family except their military unit. No loyalty except to their commanders and fellow warriors. No identity except as instruments of victory. They were forbidden to marry until completing training. Forbidden to own property. Forbidden to have any life outside military service. This created something unprecedented. Professional soldiers whose entire existence revolved around mastery of combat. No civilian distractions. No divided loyalties. Just endless refinement of killing skills. They trained by fighting bulls, not from horseback with lances, but on foot with swords, learning to read an animal's movements, to predict attacks, to counter with lethal precision. If you could kill a bull in single combat, killing an armored man was just applied technique. At Ain Jalut, Mamluks used a false retreat, pretending to break and run, drawing Mongol cavalry into prepared kill zones where Mamluk archers destroyed them. Then, Mamluk heavy cavalry countercharged, crashing into disorganized Mongol formations with lances that shattered shields and pierced armor. The Mongol commander was beheaded. His army was annihilated. The Mongol advance stopped permanently. And the Mamluks? They overthrew the sultan they'd served and established their own dynasty. Slave warriors who became kings. They ruled Egypt for 250 years, the only military slave class in history to seize and hold power successfully. The psychology of legendary WRRIORS. What made these warriors truly feared wasn't just skill. It was the narrative surrounding them. Spartans were feared because everyone knew they trained from childhood to accept death. Facing them meant facing men who'd already made peace with dying, which meant they fought without hesitation or self-preservation instinct. Berserkers were feared because they seemed inhuman. How do you fight something that doesn't react to pain, that seems possessed by demons, that treats mortal wounds as annoyances? Varangians were feared because they were foreigners with no political constraints. They couldn't be bribed, couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be appealed to through shared culture or religion. They were pure mercenary violence. Immortals were feared because they never seemed to diminish. Killing one meant nothing because another appeared instantly. It created the psychological impression of fighting an infinite army. Mamluks were feared because they were professionals in an age of amateur soldiers. They'd spent their entire lives mastering war while their opponents were farmers conscripted for a season. The skill gap was insurmountable. Modern military forces study these warriors not for tactics. Warfare has changed too much, but for psychological principles. How do you create soldiers willing to face overwhelming odds? How do you break enemy morale before fighting begins? How do you turn human beings into weapons that terrify opponents into surrender? The answer these ancient warriors provided: make them legendary. Make them seem more than human. Make them so feared that rational opponents choose surrender over annihilation. Legacy of FAR. These warriors left marks on history that go beyond battle victories. Sparta's influence shaped Western military culture. The idea that warriors should be professionals trained from youth, that discipline matters more than individual heroism, that a good soldier accepts death as part of the job. Berserkers gave us the modern concept of battle rage. The psychological state where pain doesn't register, where time seems to slow, where focus narrows to pure survival violence. Varangians demonstrated that mercenary units could achieve legendary status, influencing every mercenary company from medieval free companies to modern private military contractors. Immortals introduced the concept of elite guard units that serve as both military force and political statement. Every modern presidential guard traces lineage to Persian Immortals. Mamluks proved that military skill could overcome birth status, that a slave trained properly could defeat noble-born warriors, which revolutionized thinking about military recruitment and training. Today, special forces units study these warriors. Not their techniques, those are obsolete, but their psychology, the mindset that made them legendary, the cultural factors that turned them into weapons. Because the ultimate lesson of history's most feared warriors isn't about swords or tactics. It's about fear itself, about understanding that in war, the mind is the first battlefield. Break your enemy's will before fighting begins, and you've already won. These warriors understood that fundamental truth. They cultivated fear like a crop, watered it with blood, harvested it in the form of surrendered cities and defeated armies. They weren't just warriors. They were architects of terror, and their blueprints are still being studied today.